Hey adventurers, so today is a review for the Wingfeather Tales by Andrew Peterson and others. So this is, the Wingfeather Tales is a collection of short stories set in the world of Aerwiar, so set in the same world as the Wingfeather Saga by Andrew Peterson. This, of course, is going to be fantasy. It is high fantasy, although some of these stories make it seem like a little bit like it might be a little bit of portal fantasy as well. There's some really interesting things that happened in some of these stories that blew my mind away. It's just, they're so interesting and such a unique way to tell this story, and so I don't know how much of that we'll get into. I don't remember because it's been a minute since I wrote the review itself, so I don't remember exactly what all I've said or what all I'm going to talk about, but I really enjoyed first off the different stories and the way that each author brought their own writing style into this short story that they were telling, but it also all felt so much like Aerwiar. So let's get into this. Of course, this is a fantasy like I already mentioned, but this is a series of short stories that I was absolutely blown away by. There are 7 short stories in this book, with each one being better than the previous in my opinion. So each story, as I was going through it, I loved the first one. Well, actually I didn't. The first one was written by Andrew Peterson, and I was like, okay, if this is what it's gonna be, it'll be fine, whatever. But then the next story was a little bit better, and the next story was a little bit better, and each one was just a little bit better than the last one, ending on one of my favorite stories I've ever read. And I do think I get into this a little bit later, but it's basically like a Western set in a fantasy world that's also a survival story, and it's so interesting and so well done. I didn't realize this until I was writing the review, but I only read 6 of the stories because one of them is a graphic novel, and I listened to the audiobook, so I didn't have the physical book to look at and see the graphic novel portion and read that story. So I only read 6 of the 7 stories in this, but with that being said, I did really love all 6 of these that I read. Like I already did mention, the first one was probably my least favorite. Sometime I will absolutely have to get the physical book and read that graphic novel so that I can have completed the book completely, actually. Because they were written by a handful of different authors, each story has its own feel and writing style. I already kind of mentioned this, but each of the authors has a very different, very drastic, not drastic, they've got their own feel to the story. They have their own way of telling the story, they have their own story that they want to tell. And so each one was very different, but it was very unique, but it all felt like part of this Wingfeather saga. They all told drastically different stories and included some very, very interesting ideas that I was not expecting at all. Like I mentioned, there's a little bit of portal fantasy that kind of contradicted some other things that were going on in other stories, but not a whole lot, just kind of, not really. Kind of, but not really. You'd have to read it and ask what I'm talking about in order to understand what I'm getting at here. But there were some cool things with a little bit of like world hopping type stuff within this own unique story. Each story, like I mentioned already, each story was written differently. Some of them were written as poetry, some of them were just very lyrical prose, some of them were these epic prose. It was very easy to get lost in each story because each story was so different. But at the same time, because the changes at each story, because every so often they're short stories, so they're fairly short amount of time that you're spending with the story, but because of that you were able to, it helped to not get to the point where you were zoning out and forgetting to actually listen and really pay attention to what's going on. So you'd go through and you'd complete the story and be like, wow, that was really good. And you're kind of wishing there was more, but you know if it was to go on any further, you'd probably start to just stop paying quite as much attention to it and just zone out. And so having those breaks where it completely changed, the story that you were reading, the characters that you were following, but also the writing style and the author, it helped you just to be able to be like, wow, that was so good, and then reset my mind, let's go through another one, wow, that was so good, reset. And so that was really cool for me to be able just to listen to it in that way. We get to see several stories revolving around characters that we know from the saga, as well as some stories that were referenced and some that were completely new. Of all of them, my favorite was the last one, The Places Beyond the Maps, is what that short story is called. The story had so many different sides to it. It was allegorical in some ways, but it was also a revenge story and a western and a survival story. So like I mentioned, there's all these different aspects of this story that's being told. This journey of self-discovery and sacrifice at times, and it reminded me in many ways of like Narnia, which is a really weird thing to say because it's not Narnia, but there was some things that harken back to the way that certain aspects of Narnia are written, and that was really cool. It was a story about a man who had given up on everything and was searching for answers. He makes wrong decision after wrong decision, and it leads him to turn back and become a better man. I did guess who he was long before the end, but that didn't make the reveal any less impactful. So as you're reading, you can kind of, if you've read the Wingfeather Saga, you can kind of guess who this character is, but this story was being told, and I knew exactly who the character was almost from the beginning. I was like, is this the character who I think it is? And then at the end it was revealed that yes, it was. But that doesn't make that reveal any less impactful because of the way it was written and because of the story that was told and the way that you didn't know for sure until it was revealed, and you're like, I thought so, and I understand why this story is told as it is. So I really liked that. I really thought that was a cool way to tell the story. I haven't read a lot of short stories, but the fact that I could find 7, or rather 6, because I didn't read the graphic novel that I loved, was great. It makes me want to read a lot more short stories. And there's some I know that I can find, so there's both novellas and short stories that I know. There's lots of Sanderson ones that I need to get to, but there's also just various other short stories and novellas and stuff that I would like to get to and like to read. Overall, the Wingfeather Tales was just an amazing addition to this Wingfeather Saga, this story set in the world of Aerwiar, or stories set in the world of Aerwiar rather. And as much as I had a few issues with the way that Wingfeather Saga ended, overall I just really enjoyed this series, and this collection of short stories just made me enjoy it all the more with the way that it fleshed out the world, the way that it added new elements to the world that I wouldn't have expected, but that were so interesting and felt so fitting to the world. Thank you guys for watching my review of the Wingfeather Tales by Andrew Peterson. This was a fun one for me to read and a very fun one for me to review. So happy that I actually got to do it. I post videos every Monday and Thursday. We have our social medias linked in the description down below. Please like and comment and subscribe if you haven't already. We will see you guys again soon. Stay well.